Amtgard has 12 classes and 6 levels. Look at any video game or tabletop game, and you're probably going to see classes and levels. Designers use this as a way to chunk information for new players, and to show your character's growth as you advance. But LARPs don't work like video games. In those games, designers can scale challenges for your current character level, but in a LARP, you're often facing max-level players on your first day. And even if you don't have a lot of abilities yourself, you still need to know how the other players' abilities work in order to help resolve them. So classes and levels in Amtgard mostly aren't fulfilling their design goals, and they're just gatekeeping powerful abilities from the people who need them the most. To put it mildly, Amtgard has a problem with classes and advancement. Recent editions of Amtgard have acknowledged this problem. V7 took many of the most powerful abilities and lowered them from level 6 down to level 3. Then V8 made it much faster to get to those levels. But these are just band-aids, when the real problem is that these mechanics aren't doing for LARPs what they do for other types of games. So, to address the issue, we can't just make fixes within the class system. We need to take a look at redesigning the systems from the ground up. To its credit, V9 is already aiming to revamp character advancement to reduce gatekeeping and increase customization. It does this by laying out abilities in pools and allowing you to access those pools in any order that you want. But this has received complaints for being overly complicated so that even warriors feel like they need a spell list. Plus, the main reason for using a leveling system in RPGs in the first place is to give information to players slowly, so that they can learn the system gradually and aren't overwhelmed. V9 does the opposite of this, by unlocking the entire ability roster for your class at level 2. And that's on top of the fact that you also need to know how your opponent's abilities work. We want our class system to onboard new players and diversify playstyles. So, let's imagine a new player on their first day. They saw people playing in the park and they come over and say, "That looks fun, can I join?" What happens next? Well, according to the rulebook, that player is immediately bombarded with a choice between 12 different classes, all with abilities that they don't understand how to use. Or, more likely, that player is told to play peasant. And then you hope that they do some reading before they show up again next week, if they show up again next week. But when you tell a new player to play peasant, you're just admitting that the class system isn't doing its job. For people to make empowered and meaningful choices, they have to have information. So, what information does a brand new player who's never even seen the rulebook have? Well, more than you might think. I think a new player, on just seeing a few exchanges of combat, can already break down what they're seeing into 4 distinct playstyles. They can see that there are people fighting in melee. They can see that there's people fighting at range. They can see that there's people who aren't even really fighting, they're just using a lot of abilities. And they can see that there's people who are fighting and also using abilities. So this is where our class system starts. There's only 4 classes. As you advance, we'll expand the options, but on day 1, this is the only choice you're faced with. So, let's define these classes. For people fighting in melee and ranged, we'll give these classes good proficiencies, but no class abilities whatsoever. The melee class gets all of the melee weapons plus shields and armor. The ranged class gets all of the ranged weapons plus shorts and light armor. These classes each have a unique role to fill on the battlefield, so the choice between them is important, and there's just no need to bog down new players who just want to jump in and fight with abilities that they don't understand or even really care about yet. Let's name the classes so that players can use those archetypes to help make a choice. Our melee class represents all of our frontline fighters. Let's call it Warrior. Our ranged class is going to be fighting on the fringes of the battlefield. Let's call it Knave. Now, for the player who wants to use a lot of abilities on day 1, we'll obviously make this our spellcasting class. Let's call it Acolyte. Spellcasting is tough on day 1. We don't want to present new players with choices that they don't understand. Also, using weapons is more intuitive than using magic, so if we give a spellcasting player a sword, they might just use the sword and forget that they even have magic. That's a recipe for a bad time. So we need our starting loadout to teach people how to play the class on day 1, so I'm going to make 2 controversial choices here. Our Acolyte will get no proficiencies and no spell points. We'll give them a limited number of spells, say 4, and make all of them reusable in some way. As for defense, I'll go into that a little more in another video, but for now let's say I'm going to create a new type of item in the game, spellcasting implements. These will represent your staff or rod, magic wand, or packed dagger, whatever. They're going to be padded like weapons, but they aren't weapons. You can't use them for attacks. You can only use them to block if you're an acolyte. So, that gives you a pretty powerful tool for defense, having a staff at no cost, but if you want to help your team, you have to use your magic. Finally, for our player who wants some abilities, but also to fight, we'll give them proficiency with shorts, light armor, small shields, and since our acolyte got 4 spells, we'll give this one 2. This class is going to represent people who want to play cleric, warlock, paladin archetypes, so we'll call it the Zealot. So, now we have our starting point. Within a couple of weeks, we're going to want to move players on to level 2 so that they can start getting class abilities. Players are going to want more than 4 archetypes, so to diversify advancement, I'm going to borrow a different mechanic from video games. Talent trees. But instead of having the talent trees loop back on themselves at the end, I'm going to have them continue to branch so that the end of each branch represents a completely different playstyle. V9 has it right that we don't want to gatekeep our powerful abilities, so I'm going to make the controversial step of moving the level cap from 6 down to 4, and we'll make sure that the abilities at the highest levels are more specialized, but not more powerful. Let's look at Knave as an example. At level 2, we'll let them choose between powerful abilities, Trap and Poison. One of them is for crowd control, the other's direct damage. Very different playstyles. Also at level 2, let's give everybody a cool roleplay quest power. That way your roleplay powers will never reduce your combat effectiveness. To help players understand the archetype that they're specializing into, let's take an idea from the very first editions of Amtgard and give the classes titles at each level. So, our knave who chooses to use traps is going to be called a scout, and our knave who chooses to use poisons we'll call a rogue. As we continue, the paths will continue to branch. This has a special benefit. If an ability is shared between 2 archetypes, you never have to unlock it twice. If I'm leveling up as an archer, and I've been poisoning my arrows, and then I decide I'd rather play an assassin, I don't need to unlock poison again. I can just invest my next set of experience into leveling up my rogue along the assassin track, and boom, I'm already level 3. And there you have it. New players never feel overburdened or locked in, and can start making empowering choices on their first day at the park. Some of you might have questions like, what are all these new abilities, and why do max level characters have so few of them? Or, how do I use spell points in a system like this?
That's the neat thing. You don't.
Those are great questions, but to answer them fully, I'm going to need another video. So for now, thanks for watching, links to the design documents below. I'm Herrick the Mildly Perturbed, and this has been Putting It Mildly.